Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Chris McPherson Show Daily Dose. A little bit later than usual, we are doing our NBL Power Rankings and looking to get right into talking through where all the teams sit. We've taken into account last night's Ignite Cup match where the Brisbane Bullets were blown out by the New Zealand Breakers and have pulled together the latest for you as we head into some Thursday night basketball and onwards from there. So, as always, if you haven't already, make sure you hit subscribe down below. You can follow us along on our social media channels as well at The Chris Mack Show. And we look forward to seeing you on more and more of the episodes and getting involved in some of our live watch-alongs, which will be back from next week. But let's get it underway. Let's talk some power rankings in the NBL. The season is heating up. We're about a third of the way through for most of the sides, and it is getting certainly interesting for some sides, devastating for some fans, and there's some movers and shakers in the competition. But let's start with our power rankings and get things rolling. Starting at number 10, the Cairns Taipans. It's a tough time to be a hooper in Queensland, that's for sure. The Snakes have won just one of their last 9 matches. And injuries and disconnect are rife at the Taipans. McVeigh's been out of action for chunks of the year with his wrist. He is back now, but they need more from him. Mojave Kings' 32-point night in a loss to Illawarra does show, I guess, some promise. But this is a side on paper that should be delivering much, much more. And much to Adam Ford's chagrin, they certainly are not at the moment. Rain Smith's foot injury is adding salt to the wounds. He should return in the next couple of weeks, although the projection of a possible return for Sam Wardenberg is December. There's also some cause for mild optimism if you're a Taipans fan, just depending on what his impact can be. His ceiling could be a huge uplift for them. But then again, their roster ceiling could be a huge uplift on their current performance. The question will be, will it be too late for a Taipan side that could be well out of contention by Christmas? Heading on to number 9, and we look at their Queensland counterparts, the Brisbane Bullets. They seem to have found some spark with a win over the Jack Jumpers, but last night's first half collapse against the New Zealand Breakers on the Gold Coast is hugely concerning. Throwing a suspected ACL injury to the one shining light for the Bullets at the moment in Casey Prather, and things look dire in Bris Vegas. This is a squad that will now need to rely on former MVP Jalen Adams and a former G Leaguer in Dakota Mathias to hit their straps. But they are more up and down than a roller coaster at the moment and often look better as a side when their young bench is on the floor for the Bullets. They do welcome back Sam McDaniel from an ankle injury soon, but it's hard to see how he fixes all of the gaps in what is an inconsistent case of a basketball side at the moment. As I said before, things are grim for hoops in Queensland at the moment with what we're seeing right now. Brisbane have 2 more games against the top 2 sides on the ladder before the FIBA break, and it's hard to see how they challenge Melbourne United or Southeast Melbourne over the next 2 weeks. That FIBA break can't come quick enough for Stu Lash and his coaching team. Moving on to number 8, and we look at the Tassie Jack Jumpers. They're on the slide, 4 losses in a row, and things are far from peachy in the Apple Isle. The Jackies are in a world of hurt with Will Magnay adding to their injury list, and they've been inconsistent and are now threatening to potentially fall apart altogether. Magnay should only be a short absence, but as they slide down the ladder, it is an absence they cannot afford. They have a huge 3 games before the FIBA break as they start with Adelaide this week, followed by Perth on the road, and then welcoming Sydney into the MyState Bank Arena before that hiatus of the competition. If they do go 0 from 3 in that stretch, it is going to be a long way back across the back end of the season at 5-10, as they almost are midway through their campaign. Tiger Campbell and Bryce Hamilton certainly need to turn it up these next 2 weekends to keep their season in a positive place. If they can't gel and fire against Adelaide, the drums might start to beat for the pressure mounting on Scott Roth. For the New Zealand Breakers, they come up to 7th. It was a terrible start to the season. They'll own that and they'll admit that. But it has started to turn around, and despite a tough loss to Sydney on the road last week, their huge win over Brisbane last night in the Ignite Cup shows the leaps that the Breakers are beginning to take. Sam Menanga and Parker Jackson-Cartwright are certainly finding their rhythm. Kareem Lopez is starting to contribute, which is great for the next star. Import Rob Baker is also starting to get in on the action and show what he can deliver, putting up a double-double last night in that win over the Bullets. Consistency is the key and the question mark for the Breakers, and they'll definitely need to back up that big, big win over the Bullets in their key clash this weekend. The longest road trip in the NBL. They make the journey over to Perth to take on the Wildcats. We know PJC has the ability to win games almost on his own, but they've shown earlier in the season he needs a couple of solid cameos from teammates to seal this deal alongside him. His lethal left will go a long way towards W's, but it's a team game after all. Speaking of the Perth Wildcats, they come in sixth place. Win, loss, win, loss, win. It's an up and down roller coaster ride for this developing Perth side as they sit mid-table, knowing some back-to-back results either way could quickly dictate their ride from here. String together some wins and all of a sudden they are rapidly a top four side. On the flip side of the coin, back-to-back losses come and they'll be fighting to keep themselves out of the cellar mire. We saw better Wildcats basketball on the road last week versus Adelaide where they got it done against former Wildcat Bryce Cotton. A solid team contribution where the defensive efforts, most notably in that fourth quarter, got it done, shutting down Adelaide to just 11 points in the fourth. The big test comes in their next two games, two fellow mid-table teams at home in front of the Red Army. First this weekend, they take on the New Zealand Breakers, and then next weekend, it'll be the Tasmania's Jack Jumpers. Win both, and all of a sudden, you're a playoff contender heading into a big clash with Melbourne United, where we can see what that hustle really delivers on the road. Lose one or both, and all of a sudden, you're stuck in mid-table play-in fights for the foreseeable future. The Wildcats' destiny's in their own hands at the moment, but what can they conjure? Heading into the top half, and we've got the Illawarra Hawks in fifth. The defending champions, they might just be back. Dave O'Hickey's made them look a much better side since his return. The big question is, was it a glimmer of hope, a flash in the pan, or is this the real deal? Can Hickey be the foil to allow McGee to shine and Harvey to drain buckets? On paper, they're a dynamic trio, and that is stacking up currently on the court. But they need some impact as well. Throw in QJ Peterson from the Pine, and this is looking like a team that could contend for a top four position. And they certainly showed that in their win over Melbourne United and backed it up with a result up against Cairns. They've got plenty of potential, but as we saw early in the season, that potential doesn't always meet performance. They need to keep on delivering. Can Justin Tatum lead the Hawks back to the playoffs after that horrific start to the campaign? Only time will tell, but they will certainly get a good measuring stick this weekend when they take on fellow informed side and their local rivals, the Sydney Kings, this week in a huge clash down there in Illawarra. Moving on to 4, and we've got the South East Melbourne Phoenix. They've probably, fair to say, drifted back from their heady highs of a few weeks ago and settled back into the pack a step. However, their ability overall is not to be questioned. These guys are certainly a fringe contender, but at the moment don't quite have the roster depth of a Sydney or a Melbourne United. On their night, however, they can mix it with the big dogs, and we've seen that at times. Josh King's hustle and grind, all-effort style of play is clearly ingrained in the DNA of this side, and they can wear their hearts on their sleeves at times. That can be a positive. It can also be a negative when the emotion overflows. The one Achilles heel for the Phoenix, you might ask, their heavy reliance on Nathan Sobey. Fortunately, he is in and around that MVP conversation currently, but a drop-off, an injury, or team shutting him down could spell danger and disaster for Southeast. The injury to Angus Glover isn't ideal at the moment either, diminishing their bench depth, but they can get back to work now after their throwdown loss to the ladder leaders. They do head towards the fever break now with 2 very winnable games against Cairns and Brisbane, followed by a great measure-up test up against Adelaide. If they can make statements in those first 2 and a positive showing in the third, they are there or thereabouts. If they can win all 3 with good performances, they are legit in the frame as a championship contender. Anything else, it's not going to be a good news story for the Phoenix and might be indicative of a little slide down the ladder. Heading into our top 3, and we talk the Adelaide 36ers, and that's where they fall. They've had a few bumps in the road in recent weeks, but as they say, form is temporary, but class is permanent. And they have all the class in the world personified in one man, 5-time MVP Bryce Cotton. The one thing they've shown, though, is a weakness when teams can slow Bryce down. And they aren't getting enough consistency of delivery from their other stars like Isaac Humphries, DJ Vasiljevic and co. We've seen the supporting cast show their best at times. So we know the high-performance ceiling is there. Unfortunately, it's too few and far in between for the 36ers and their fans. Adelaide looked great as a side in one-off games. However, a little like the Phoenix, their reliance on an individual, despite said individual being one of the best ballers we've ever seen in the NBL, does make them beatable. And it makes it hard to see them reigning supreme in back-to-back playoff series later in the season and lifting a championship trophy at this point. If we can see more from those cast players, this story may change. Heading into number 2, the Sydney Kings. Look, it may just be a false dawn, but it promises better tomorrows at this stage for Kudos Bank Arena. A huge week for the Kings, making a statement with a 3rd consecutive win to show some more consistency after last week's win against Melbourne United. KD is flying, Xavier is cooking, and they are closing out games, which has been a key weakness earlier in the year. This win against New Zealand was a Brian Gorge and DNA performance to knock them off. There was plenty of clutch plays as well from Bulkwal, Kuatnoy and other role players, and it clearly started to share the load and freed up their marquees. Delhi taking half a step back hasn't hurt their cause either, and it looks like they're finding some of the mix and balance they need to get this talented roster gelling at its best. This weekend against Illawarra, another huge test. Finally, of course, in number one spot, as they have been reigning supreme all season, Dean Vickerman's Melbourne United. They responded as we expected they would after their back-to-back losses and got it done in the throwdown. Dean Vickerman will still want more, but will be glad to be back in the winner's circle and trending in the right direction. A deep squad that is beyond anything any other team has assembled to this point. The thing is, they have to live up to that performance and expectation week in, week out. Throw in the fact that Shea Ili is due to come back this round or next to further bolster this absolutely stacked unit, and things are looking positive for Melbourne back in that winner's circle. That said, United fans, they'll accept a couple of blips. But after that perfect 9-0 start to the season, anything less than first place at the end of the regular season and a championship is going to be a disappointment for United fans. Well, big thanks for tuning in. A huge week of NBL action coming to you across the next 4 days. Make sure to check out some of the games. Let us know in the comments below who you think we've missed the mark with in our power rankings, who you see emerging, who you see sliding. But in the meantime, make sure you hit subscribe on whatever platform you are watching or listening on, whether that be YouTube or your favorite podcast platform. And check us out on your favorite social media as well, at The Chris Mack Show. You can find us on X, on TikTok, on Facebook, and on Instagram. But until next time, a huge thank you to you for tuning in to your home for black and white of sports opinion. No greys here.